Think about the person you are when nobody is watching. Not the version of you that shows up to work. Not the version that responds to emails and sits in meetings and uses the right tone of voice. The one underneath. Now imagine you were never allowed to be that person. Not because you chose to hide it, but because the rank you were born into had already decided who you were, what you wore, how you walked, how low you bowed, and whether you were allowed to feel anger without being executed for it. That was the samurai system. And almost everything you have been told about it is wrong. When most people picture a samurai, they picture a warrior, a swordsman, a man of honor and violence and controlled stillness, the lone figure standing in mist, the blade drawn in the moment before everything changes. That image exists. It has existed for centuries, and it describes, at best, perhaps 1 in 10 of the people the system actually contained. The other 9, they were clerks, tax collectors, gatekeepers and grain counters, and men who carried swords they were legally forbidden to draw. The samurai class was not a warrior class. It was a bureaucracy wearing the costume of a warrior class. And once you understand that, the entire history of feudal Japan reframes. Not as a story of honor, as a story of hierarchy so rigid, so inherited, and so inescapable that it shaped not just what you did every day, but who you were allowed to become. The Japanese feudal hierarchy, the one that governed daily life for nearly 200 years, ran in a single direction, downward. At the top sat the shogun, not a warrior, a governor. By the time the Tokugawa Shogunate stabilized Japan in 1603, the wars were largely over. The shogun's primary job was administration, managing over 400 feudal lords, regulating trade, controlling movement, watching for rebellion. He lived in a castle in Edo surrounded by bureaucrats, not battlefields. Historian Mary Elizabeth Berry spent years studying the Tokugawa administration and found something that should stop you. The Tokugawa Shogunate was one of the most sophisticated paper bureaucracies in early modern history. Surveys, censuses, tax records, population registers, all of it managed, classified, and filed by samurai, not warriors. Paper pushers with swords on their hips. Below the shogun came the daimyo, the regional lords, 300 of them, governing the provinces. The daimyo maintained their own retinues, their own courts, their own hierarchies within hierarchies. And they too spent most of their lives not in battle. They spent them in politics, managing obligations, navigating the shogunate's requirement that every daimyo spend alternating years in Edo, far from their home domains. A system called sankin-kōtai, designed specifically to exhaust their wealth and prevent rebellion. The daimyo were not free, they were controlled. The rank that gave them power was the same rank that made them prisoners of obligation. Below the daimyo came the samurai retainers. This is where most people imagine the warrior class truly lived. And here is where the reframe becomes uncomfortable. Tokugawa Japan, the roughly 250 years between 1600 and 1868, was defined by peace, not occasional peace, structural peace. The last major civil conflict ended before this era began, which means that for 250 years, an entire warrior class existed in a society that had almost no need for warriors. What do you do with a professional military when there is no war? In most societies, you shrink it, disband it, move on. Japan did not do that. The samurai class was preserved, not as soldiers, as a social system, as a hereditary identity that could not be dissolved because it was the foundation of the entire order. So the samurai stayed. They became administrators, magistrates, police officials, estate managers. They processed legal disputes, collected taxes, maintained order, and filed reports. And they did all of this with a sword on their hip that they were, in most cases, never supposed to use. The Tokugawa law was specific. A samurai could draw his sword only under very limited circumstances. Drawing it unnecessarily, in anger, in a dispute, in the wrong social context, was not proof of honor. It was a breach of order, a violation of the system, possibly punishable by death. The rank that determined all of this was not chosen, it was inherited. And below the higher retainer class, the hatamoto, the bannermen who served directly under the shogun, came the mid-level samurai, the ones who filled the vast majority of administrative posts, the ones who enforced the rules without ever making them. Historian Eiko Ikegami, in her study of samurai social structure, describes these mid-level retainers as experiencing a peculiar form of social imprisonment. They held a rank that defined them as warriors. They lived lives that required no warfare. They were paid stipends, in rice, that often fell short of actual living costs. Many mid-level samurai were quietly poor, supplementing their income with side work, making umbrellas, selling handicrafts, tutoring children. While keeping up the appearance of a warrior class they could not financially sustain, the sword on the hip was not a weapon. It was a performance, a status marker they were required to maintain because without it, the entire fiction collapsed. And then there were the lowest samurai, the ashigaru. These were the foot soldiers, the ones who had been incorporated into the samurai class at the edges, given the rank but almost none of its privileges. Below them, the doshin, low-ranking police enforcers, samurai in name only, assigned to patrol streets, manage prisons, and break up fights in the lower quarters of the city. These men could carry swords. They interacted daily with people who could not. But within the samurai hierarchy, they were essentially invisible, doing the dirty work of a class that barely acknowledged they existed. The samurai system had no floor. It had a ceiling, and every layer below it was suspended at a different height, close enough to the dignity above to understand exactly what they were missing, but separated by a gap no amount of effort could close. Because the gap was not about performance, it was about birth. Here is what none of the films show. The rank governed everything, not just your job, your clothes. The color and fabric of what you were allowed to wear was regulated by rank. The formality of your bow, how low, to whom, for how long, was dictated by rank. Whether you were allowed to make eye contact with someone above you, whether you were permitted to sit in their presence, whether your sword could be a certain length, whether you were allowed to carry a certain kind of surname at all. The body itself was a document. Everything visible about you communicated your position in the hierarchy to everyone who looked. And the hierarchy was not something you entered. It was something you were born into and carried until you died. Historian Morgan Patelka writes that samurai identity was not a profession. It was a hereditary caste, a closed category, one that most people within it experienced not as honor, but as obligation. An obligation that had already been agreed to by someone who died before you were born. And this is where the samurai story stops being a history lesson, because every human being alive has experienced some version of this. Not the sword, not the ceremony, but the inherited expectation, the rank you arrived into, the family, the class, the country, the position, before you had done anything at all, before you had demonstrated who you were, before you had been given the chance to choose. The Edo-era samurai did not choose the warrior identity. It was assigned. And for 250 years, the entire class maintained the performance of that identity. The sword, the bow, the posture, the code, in a society that had, for most practical purposes, stopped needing it. Not because they believed in it entirely, but because the alternative, admitting the performance was a performance, would have dissolved the only order they had. The samurai class was abolished in 1876. The Meiji government ended the stipends, banned the wearing of swords in public, opened civil and military positions to anyone, regardless of birth rank. Some samurai adapted. Some became the founders of Japan's modern military and its first corporations. Some became educators and politicians. Many others had nothing, because the only thing they had ever been, the only identity the system had given them, was a rank that no longer existed. And many of them found that when the performance finally ended, they did not know what was underneath it. Most samurai never fought. They lived and died inside a system that told them who they were before they had a chance to decide. They maintained the costume of a warrior class through 2.5 centuries of peace. They carried the sword as symbol while filing the paperwork. They bowed the correct number of degrees to the correct people for their entire lives. And when it all ended, the question that had always been waiting, quiet, unasked, buried under centuries of obligation, finally surfaced. Who were you? when the rank was removed. You are not a samurai. But somewhere between the title you carry and the person underneath it, that question is still there.